Avi,
It's Arnie.
huh?
It's Arnie.
You left out one thing with patience, trust, and will. You left out humor.
Yeah.
Very good. Rabbi, you're muted. I'm not sure why.
I am muted.
Not-
You know, when I talk on the phone these days, and I know I shouldn't be talking, I press mute so that when I talk, no one can hear me. I always tell students that when we're counseling, we should see the word wait in front of us. And wait stands for, why am I talking? And I know that in rabbinic school, we try to prepare students how to talk, and it's much more important. I'm talking to myself, letting you listen, but it's much more important to learn how to listen. So today, we're about ready on Shabbat to read Parshat Bishalach, and it's a wonderful portion. And I was thinking, by the way, that next year, God willing, we should all be healthy, rather than go through parts of this book that I hope will come out soon. I want to do another volume on the prophetic portion of each week. Maybe next week we'll start developing that. But I wanted to dedicate the shiur, of course, to Judy's sister and to Rachel Bat Perel. That's Fern's mom. We all know Fern, who every day tries to do something special. And Fern's mom has been hospitalized, but thank God not in danger. Hopefully she'll be fine. But I'm a student of history, and as Toby says, I remember too many things. And 50 years ago, this portion was the first Shabbat I spent in Riverdale. And I had just signed a big contract at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale. It was a big $16,000 contract. That's how we did not go up that much for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And it's been a joy, but I still remember that first Shabbat. We really were in the boiler room. That's what we had. We had a boiler room in the Whitehall building. And I sometimes go back to that boiler room and I just want to see it. And it's no longer a boiler room. Now it's a fancy real estate office. But I just remember being there that Shabbat. Toby remained back, and Toby was pregnant then, and she was back in Muncie with Dina and Ilana. They were little girls. And I remember going home after that, and I said, what did I get myself into? I mean, there was literally nothing there. And the pipes, you could see the pipes, and they were rusted. It probably was asbestos on the walls, I'm not sure. And every time somebody would flush the toilet, you'd hear the water running through the pipes. And I would be speaking, and there was a little drip. I always say I was getting boiled from the water. The boiling water would drop down. And that's what it was. That's what we had all the way back. And I wanted to give you just a sense. I still remember the first talk that I gave at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, whatever there was then. But I'm going to do it in a learning, much more sophisticated way. When one speaks on a Shabbat morning talk is a certain kind of talk, and a shiur is another kind of talk. But it's hard to believe that it's 50 years. Ruby's not on now, but my dear Stanley used to always say, we live so many chunks of 20 or 30 years in our adult life, setting certainly 50 years. How many chunks of 50 years do we live? Very, very few. And so there's open up with a beautiful legend about the Kutzker Rebbe. And we touched on this, I believe, last week, where the Kutzker, a man of a few words during the last part of his life, Menachem Mendel of Kutsk, who was a Hasidic master, he once asked In Yiddish, wo is Gott? Where is God? And that's something that every Shabbat in the Musaf, that's something that we ask. Kevodo molei olam mishatav shoalim zelazeh aye mikom kevodo. Where is the seat of God's throne? Aye mikom kevodo. Vu is God. So the Kotska students responded, Vu is God. God is everywhere. What do you mean, where is God? Everywhere. And the Kotska responded and says, Nein, mein Kinder, no, my children. Gott is wo mir lost im ein. God is where you let him enter. Aye mekom kodo. Where is the glory of God? Kavodo b'makom shemarshim oto lehikanes. God is where we let him enter. Very powerful thought in that give and take. And with that opening, I'd like to jump to this week's portion, which was the text of that Dvar Torah 50 years ago. And we're turning now, Shuli, to chapter 14 in Exodus. And we're going to pick it up with sentence 10. So it's chapter 14, sentence 10, and we're going to do a little reading. We all know the story that the Jews left Egypt. They left Egypt, and then we're told, chapter 14, sentence 10, Ufaro hikriv, and Pharaoh, pursuing the Jews, was coming close. Vayisu v'nei Yisrael et eineihem. If we can make that a little larger, Shuli, if it's possible. Vayisu v'nei Yisrael et eineihem, and the children of Israel lifted their eyes. V'hinei Mitzrayim nosea achareihem, and behold, the Egyptians were journeying, were pursuing after them. Vayiru me'od. Is there a way we can make that larger? I'm not sure we can, maybe not. Vayiru me'od.
Rabbi, it's small because it's on your phone, but it's pretty
good.
big on the screen.
Okay, great.
Sorry.
I was once
You want me to
sitting-
read it?
No, I have it in here too. I was once sitting in Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik's class. I used to sit right in front of him. And I thought he was an old man. I was in his class. He was 42, 43. I was 18. And he was reading the commentary from the Rambam. And I said to him, Rebbe, the letters are so small, you're going to hurt your eyes. And you know what he said? He said, Avram, if you know what you're reading, you can make it out. I never forgot that. Anyway, I can make the Shema Yisrael out. I'm reading from a Chumash. V'nei Mitzrayim nosea achareihem. And behold, the Egyptians were pursuing them. Vayiru ma'od. And the Jews were very frightened. Vayitzaku v'nei Yisrael el Adonai. In honor of my dear friend Phil Schneider, I drink some water. And the Jews called out to God. Vayomru el Moshe, if you can point to the place, Shuli. And they said to Moshe, thank you. Hamibli ein kvarim b'Mitzrayim l'kachtanu lamud b'midbar. Aren't there enough graves in Egypt that you've taken us to die in the desert? Mazot asita lanu. What have you done to us? Lahotzi anu miMitzrayim. Why have you taken us out of Egypt? We could have died an easier death and been buried appropriately in Egypt. Didn't we tell you this in Egypt after you were first rebuffed by Paro? We told you, Chadal mimenu, stop. Chadal mimenu. We told you, leave us alone. Chadal mimenu, v'navdat Mitzrayim. We're better off as slaves to Egypt. Kitov lanu avodat Mitzrayim nimutenu bamidbar. We would much prefer being slaves to Egypt than dying in the wilderness. Vayomer Moshe el ha'am. And Moses at that point says to the people, Al tira'u, don't be afraid. Hityatzvu, stand firm. Uru'u et yeshuat Adonai asher yaseh lachem hayom. And look at the way God is going to save you today. Ki asher item et Mitzrayim hayom, lo tosifu lirotam od ad olam. Moses says to the people, that which you're seeing in Egypt today, you will never see them again. He's hinting, those who are pursuing you will be done away with. And then sentence 14, these famous words, Moses says, Adonai yilachem lachem. The Lord will do battle for you. The atem tacharishum. All you have to do is remain silent. And so, what's the scene, if I can face everyone? The scene is that the Egyptians are pursuing the Jews, and the Jews are frightened, and they berate Moshe. They put him down. We would have been better off in Egypt than dying this kind of death. We're going to be annihilated. We're going to be annihilated. Please, this is not our way. You shouldn't have taken us out. And Moses responds and reassures them, God is going to be with you. And his famous words, Adonai lachem lachem, God will do battle for you. Vatem tacharishun, and you can remain silent. And now let's look at the next sentence. This was the punchline of the talk. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. And immediately, one of my favorite transitional sentences, the Lord says to Moshe, Ma titzak elai. God says to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Daber el bnei Yisrael. Speak to the children of Israel, v'yisa'u, and tell them to travel forward. Now, if I can face everyone. Wait a minute. Moses had just told the people, you be still, you don't have to do anything. God is going to do the fighting, don't worry. And immediately afterwards, God responds to Moshe, and he says, you've got it wrong. Ma titzak elai. Now, titzak, the word so'ak, is a biblical verb that sometimes means prayer. And now I'm reading the Midrash, quoted by the greatest of commentaries, quoted by Rashi. Rashi says, listen to this. I get the chills when I read it. Lamadnu, we learn from here. Shehaya Moshe omeid umitpalel. That after Moses said, we can stand dormant, quiet. God will fight for us. And Moshe was davening. Shehaya Moshe omeid umitpalel. Because Moses had told the people, we can daven and God's going to fight for us. Amma lo hakadosh baruch hu. And God has different names. This appellative title, every time it says, Holy One, blessed be He, I think it's something that God says that you would expect God wouldn't say. It's a holy comment that you would expect is not a holy comment. That's why the Torah leans over to say about God that this is a holy comment. What does God say? Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God says to Moses, Lo et ata leha'arich b'tfilah. This is not the time. It's just not the time for lengthy prayers. It is not the time for lengthy prayers. And the language is matitzak elai, Lo et ata larich b'tfilah sheYisrael nitunim b'tzara. We are in distress, and the sea is in front of us, and the Egyptians behind us, and you're davening? Okay, if you have to daven, daven. But it's not the time, as my father would say, for a lang b'shmona esrei. This is not the time for a long shmona esrei. I'm reading an English translation. Moses, too, was praying, and God told him, now when Israel is in distress is no time for lengthy prayers. Dabero b'nei Yisrael v'yisa'u. Tell the children and they should travel. And if we look at the next sentences, it says, Ve'ata harem et matcha. This is now sentence 15. God says to Moshe, lift your staff, unite et yadcha alayam, and cast your hand, the staff, over the sea, uveka'ehu, and it will split. V'yavohu b'nei Yisrael b'toch hayam bayabasha. Let the children and the rabbis understand this to me. Let them come into the water. Let them come. They shouldn't wait for it to split and then walk in the dry land. No, they should go into the water, bayam, which will then turn into the dry land. That was the gist of the talk. If I can face everyone, that in moments of need, in moments of distress, this goes back to January of 1973, a long time ago. That was, we were young activists. We were on fire with the Soviet Jewry movement, to the Ethiopian Jewry movement. We were never again Jews. Born at the tail end of the Shoah, our message was, we would never, ever be guilty of silence again. I stand in judgment of no one during the Shoah, but we said, never again, never again. We were going to do our share. And I guess I tried in that first Shabbat. I'm not sure I know what I'm doing now, but then I certainly did not know what I was doing. But I think I chose that kernel of an idea because that would be a sacred mission of the Bayit for many years to come. That it would be an activist shul. It would be a shul that would not be silent in the face of challenges. We would never, ever be silent. Now here I want to add something just to add some depth to it, something that I don't believe I said then. But I want to quote again a thought of my teacher, Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik. I was more influenced by him in life than even his brother, who's better known, Rabbi Yosheber, although Rabbi Yosheber had an enormous influence on my life. He was an unusual creative giant. And let's take a look for a moment at first, let's take a look at Exodus chapter 6, sentence 6. Here we're going into this a little bit more deeply. In chapter 6, sentence 6, the Torah presents for the first time different languages of redemption. The Daled Lashonot, some say that it corresponds to the 4 cups of wine that we drink at the Seder. And this is when God is saying to Moshe that he should go. This is part of going to Pharaoh. Pharaoh had rebuffed him. God said, you must go back. Lochein emor lifnei Yisrael ani Adonai. God says, V'hotzeti etchem mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim. I will take you out from under the burdens of Egypt. V'hitzalti etchem me'avodatam. And I want to underline that word, v'hitzalti. Hatzalah, if I can face everyone. I'm not going into the 4 different languages of redemption, but I want to say a word about Hatzalah. We know Hatzalah because Hatzalah, taking it from this verb, is an ambulance corps. What does Hatzalah do? I've been the recipient of help from Hatzalah on a very, very personal level. Someone is not feeling well, you call Hatzalah. And it's often the case that the recipient at that moment is not in a position to help herself or himself. Hatzalah means to save, but in the process of saving, the way that term is used in the Bible, it's used that the one who does the saving is the one who is full of the action. The one who is being saved is unable to help oneself. If I need oxygen, if I need help in breathing, if the heart has to be, God forbid, brought back, the recipient lies there, unable to help oneself. Hatzalah means that I'm jumping into the ocean, I'm jumping into the river to save someone who is drowning. And the one who is drowning can't help herself or himself. That's the meaning of the word Hatzalah. Now, let's take a look at chapter 14, sentence 30. This now is after the sea had split. We had walked through the sea after we had jumped in, and the sea had split and then covered the Egyptians. Mind you, it's not as if all of Egypt drowned, only those who were pursuing the Jews. There were 600 chariots, 3 people on each chariot. So those who were pursuing the Jews, they suffered the consequences. It's not all of Egypt, but only those who were pursuing the Jews. But in chapter 14, let's take a look at it. In chapter 14, sentence 30, what does the text say? In chapter 14, sentence 30, I'm looking it up. Here it is. It says, well, let's take it from sentence 29 or even 28. Vayashuvu hamayim vaychasu et harecha v'et haparashim l'chol paro habayim achreihem bayam lo nisha bahem ad echad. The Egyptians were vanquished. Uvinei Yisrael halchu bayabasha b'toch hayam v'amayim lemchuma miminam u'mismalam. But the Jews were saved. And then look at this text. Vayosha Adonai vayom ahu et Yisrael miyad Mitzrayim. Now there's a deflection. Vayosha means, and the Lord saved the Jewish people. Now, if I can face everyone, this is the kernel, this is the essence of what I was trying to say 50 years ago. There's a difference between Hatzalah and Yeshua. Hatzalah means that person A saves person B, and person B has been unable to help herself or himself. Yeshua is different. And this is the way the Bible speaks. The Bible has its own language. Its own language. I want to say a word about that in a moment, but I want to finish this thought. Yeshua means that the person being saved is still in a position to save herself or himself. I want to repeat that. Hatzalah, that ambulance service, even if I can't help myself, those holy people, and I wish they would be women by their laws, it's only men. I was once critical of it, and they do great things. I just don't understand why women are not in that service, certainly in Riverdale, which is such a forward-thinking community. Be that as it may, they do great work. But Hatzalah is, I can't help myself. Yeshua is different. Let's remember that God took us out of Egypt. When we left Egypt, it was God himself who took us out. We all know the story of the angel of death flying over Jewish homes. God did it all. When we got to the sea, we were active participants in the process. And I want to say something about the use of terms. This is especially dedicated to my Estelle and others. You see, the Bible speaks in its own language. I am very enamored by a scholarly take of the Bible. I'm very enamored by it. I love studying with my son. I love that I start with Rashi and he's going to start with the Septuagint and with the Vulgate and with the original Greek and the original whatever it is. And it's very enticing to me. It's very, very alluring. I love that scholarship. It's like my son said to me. He said to me a while back, I've shared this with you, Abba, we learn the same text. I try to find out what the text means, and you're trying to find meaning in the text. You see, for me, the Bible is a sacred text. Now, that's a bias. It's a subjective bias. I can understand someone pushing back and saying, Avi, I disagree with you. I don't think it's a holy text. And I appreciate that. I accept that position. It's a leap of faith on my part. It's a leap of faith. I think I could offer some credence to it, but it's a leap of faith. It's a sacred text. And the Bible speaks in its own language. And when there's a deflection from Hatzalah to Yeshua, that's very, very, very significant. Now, I want to say the following, that in the first few portions of the book of Exodus, the Torah describes how the Jewish people emerging from Egypt experienced the process of Hatzalah. That's why God said, as we pointed out, V'hitzalti etchem. In the Haggadah on Passover Eve, perhaps you'll consider repeating this concept. The Haggadah says, Ani v'lo malach, ani v'lo saraf. God says, God alone says the Haggadah took us out of Egypt. And I would compare this to parents who are taking care of a newborn. As parents, when a child is first born, I think I read somewhere that there is no life at creation which is more unable to help itself than the human race. When animals are born, on some level, they have a capability. But when a child comes out of the belly, out of utero, the child is helpless. And at that point, it's parents who have to completely protect the child, just as when we were born as a people, God protects the newly born Jewish people. But open your hearts, everyone. Much like a child who grows up, though, the Jewish people, having left Egypt, were expected to assume responsibilities. Now, when Moses said to the people who were crying, don't worry, God will fight for you. You don't have to do anything. Adonai yilachem lachem v'atem tacharishun. Moses thought that process of, like a parent helping the child, would continue into the future. God does not concur. God says, you know what, Moses? The sea will split and the people will be saved. But now that you've somewhat matured, I expect you to do your share. Only if you do your share and try to cross the sea on your own, only then will the sea split. And as the Jews stood at the seaside after the victory, the Torah suddenly shifts from the verb Hatzalah to the verb Yeshua. And so, according to the Talmud, the sea only splits when Nachshon ben Amminadab, followed by others, jumps into the sea. Let me just summarize, and then I want to open this up. At the beginning of Jewish history, God acts unilaterally. As we mature as a people, the onus shifts as the Jewish people assumes greater responsibility and must act to help itself. Perhaps, open your hearts to this, for this reason, when we look at the Passover Haggadah, which recounts the birth of the Jewish nation, Moses' name is not mentioned. Maybe it's alluded to once. Moses' name is not mentioned because at the beginning of our peoplehood, it was all God. We were firstborn. Firstborn. And as a mother and a father must do everything for a child, God and God alone plays the central role. But hundreds of years later, friends, I'm clinching it, as the Rav would say, in the book of Esther, in Megillat Esther, which records the Jewish people's victory over Haman, it's flipped. What's different? In the Haggadah, which describes our leaving Egypt, the name of Moses is not mentioned. In the book of Esther, the name of God is not mentioned. Having matured, the Jewish nation takes an active role in determining its future. I would just say one last word. I know I said this was the final word. This is the last word before we open it up. Of course, even in the Megillah, where God's name is not mentioned, God plays a hidden role. In my father's Megillah, every column except for the first column, because the Megillah begins with the words Vayehi b'mei Achashverosh. It was in the days of Achashverosh, but every other column of the Megillah, the first word of the column, it's written on parchment. The first word is Hamelech, the king. On its surface, who is the king? The king is Achashverosh. But more deeply, every time the noun Hamelech appears, and as I said, in some Megillot, it's the word that begins each column, it not only refers to King Achashverosh, but more deeply, it refers to the ruler of rulers, to God himself. In other words, even as, I remember I once met a couple who came up to me and said, Rabbi, when you weren't yet a rabbi, I was a student rabbi in Richmond Hill. And, I thought I was a rabbi, but I was rabbinating in that little shul. And they said to me, you did our wedding. And I said, uh-oh, you were the first couple I married off. I'm not so sure I did it right. So I quoted my mother, sometimes it's more enjoyable to live in sin. It's actually the end of the Gemara in the Darim, the Siyum just now, but I won't go into that for a moment. And so I told the story to my father, and then my father said, and I don't know to this day whether to believe him. My father said to me, I knew this was your first wedding, and you don't know it, but I'll tell you now. I was standing in the back of the room just to make sure you got it right. And you got it right. At least that's what he said. To this day, I don't know whether he was just pulling my leg or not. But I relate to that. It's like God who says, now that you've matured, you have to assume greater responsibility. But as parents, when we let go of our children and let them assume greater responsibility, our parents may not be as much there. They may not be as much there, but they're still present in some way. The presence can still be felt. So even as God steps back, because we're expected to do more, maybe God steps back, that doesn't mean that he's less present. When we look at our children, teenagers becoming young adults and marrying, we're there, we're present, but it's a certain kind of love. Sometimes I think it's easier to love when you let go than when you hold on to tight. And today we can't expect Hatzalah wherein God alone intervenes on behalf of our people in the world. But we have to do our share to bring about a new era of genuine, not Hatzalah, but Yeshua and partnership with God. This, by the way, is a tremendous difference between the Haredi world. The Haredi world actually believes, when will the Messiah come? When God is ready to bring the Messiah. And what is our position? We have to do our share to help the Messiah come. I view the establishment of the state of Israel, which many of my brothers and sisters in the Haredi world oppose. Why do they oppose it? They quote all kinds of sentences from the Song of Songs, in Ta'iru, in Ta'oru, in Ahavah, the Messiah will come only when God is good and ready. And our response is, where is God? God is where we let him in. We have to do our share. For me, the Israeli army today is doing our share. We have to do our share. And I still remember I closed that talk, that Parshat B'Shalach 50 years ago, with my favorite activist story, which I now have found in a midrash of a Rebbe, a philosopher who had the ability to answer any question, came to this one town hall meeting, and a little girl in the back of the room asked him this question, which he felt he couldn't answer for a moment. She said, I'm holding in my hand a bird that is so small. My favorite story, I told it 50 years ago. The bird was the size of a butterfly. And she says to the scholar, to the philosopher Rebbe, tell me, is this little bird alive or is it dead? And she thought, if he says the bird is alive, she'll close her hand and kill it. It was so tiny. If he says it's dead, she'll open her hands and let it live. And so the philosopher thought to himself, oh my goodness, this is the question I can't answer. Whatever I say, she'll do the opposite. If I say it's alive, she'll kill the bird. If I say it's dead, she'll let it go free. And then suddenly he got the answer. You know, Funakasha Kemenish Starben, you only grow from a question. And he looked out and said, my precious child, you hold in your hands a little bird. You ask if it is alive or is it dead. I can only tell you one thing. The fate of that bird lies in your hands. You can have it live or you can have it die. And as much as when we talk about that we have to do our share, we're always thinking about what someone else can do, bigger than us can do. What difference can we make? I am of the firm belief that every person can make a difference in our way. We may think it's a little way, but every person can make a difference. And I'm looking out at people I love, and each of you in your own way has made such a difference, such an impact on the world, step by step. When something happens as horrific as it did on Friday night, we have to make a difference, whether it's by reinforcing good deeds, everything that attack doesn't mean, or certainly in my days, I feel I was so down. And in my days, I'm not saying, and I'm sure it didn't change the world, there wouldn't be a moment when after such an incident, I'd be out in the streets just screaming. It hurts. Everyone trying to do their own share to make a difference. It's the story I have on my desk between two people. And the first one says to the second one, I'm so upset with God that sometimes I want to ask God, why is there so much poverty in the world? Why is there so much sickness in the world? Why is there so much racism in the world? And the second person says to the first person, well, why don't you ask God that question? And the first person says, because I'm afraid God's going to ask me the same question. With that, dear friends, I want to learn from you. So please, by all means, if any of you have any thoughts. That was the drasha. Yes, Bev.
It occurs to me that people would be willing, perhaps, to do their share, but they don't know what to do. They don't know how to do their share to make a change. They think that whatever they do is insignificant and that it won't make a difference. They don't realize that whatever they do is significant and does make a difference. But people do not know. I'm talking about those who are not suffering from apathy. And that's a big disease that people have. It's apathy. But people who don't have apathy don't know, what should I do? Tell me what to do. Tell me how to do. And that's why your activity on Soviet Jewry was so successful, because you told people what to do. You called them on the phone day and night and said, meet me at the embassy, meet me here, You told them what to do. They don't know what to do, and they are looking for guidance. And unfortunately, you were the leader then, but unfortunately, we do not have the same kind of leadership today, and people do not know where to begin. Where do you start? I agree that people will make the difference, but people have to know how. And so that is the issue, I think. And that is the vacuum. The vacuum is in leadership.
Right. First, Bev, I appreciate, I do want to mention that I was one of, there were millions of people out there. I'm looking at Tova and, Rabbi Haskell Lookstein, and there were others all over the world who played such a major role. But Bev, can I turn this around for a moment and ask you, you're the Rebbe. How did you know what to do? You
said it.
I mean, I see with, I
You
did
called
too.
1 o'clock in the morning.
No, but when I think, Bev, when I think of images of you, I think of you running around with petitions, you were unstoppable, Bev. So what was it? How did you know what to do?
Well, first of all, on the Soviet Jewry, you made it very clear. But on other things,
Right, take what you did.
nuclear weapons tests, for example, was my first issue that I became very active. And that was because my children were at stake. I saw that if they didn't stop testing, the next generation would be cancerous from the fallout. And so I had to do what I had to do. And I and a few others did do. I mean, we did such a small thing. We asked people for $3 and we sent it out to our mailing list. And if you give $3, when we get enough people, we'll put an ad in the Times. It was the first ad, and it was successful. We got envelopes with $20 bills. $50. People were eager for someone else to put the ad in the paper, for someone else to take the leadership. I looked at my children and I saw they was very small then, drinking the milk with the strontium 90. And I was convinced that the children of that generation would be suffering. And so and my children in particular, and that was my first motivation to really do something. And we really collected hundreds of signatures, famous people, and everybody wrote to their people that they knew. It was just like it spread out, and it was successful. And after that, there was the same nuclear policy. There was Women's Strike for Peace. There were other organizations that took up. We were just a few, 3 people working on this ad. So you need somebody to take it who has a passion. What could I say?
I think my goal this morning was first to offer, the book that spiritual activism, when one thinks about an activist, one thinks, oh, at the drop of a hat, we're out there screaming. But spiritual, we purposefully use the term spiritual because from a particular perspective, activism has a spiritual foundation. And for me, the foundational idea of as we mature as a people, as a world, that much is expected of us, that we must do our share to bring about a better world. And as usual, Bev, I think you're right. There are a couple of things. One, a person has to be, you have to be on fire. You have to be driven. You have to be on fire to feel something deeply, to feel it, and when a brother or sister is hurting, you cry out. You feel it within your kishkas. I can't teach that. It's like God asking Adam, Ayeka, where are you? Do you feel it within you? And if you feel something enough within yourself, then you feel the need to do, even whatever it is. That's the second piece. The second piece is, the first piece is to recognize that even God needs help today. It's not going to happen from God alone. We have to do our share. I think Elie Wiesel and others write about, we're waiting for the Messiah. Who knows? Maybe the Messiah is knocking at the door. We're just not getting to the door soon enough. I always tell the story that my son Dovi, when was it Ilana or Dina, when we opened the door for Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet, at the Haggadah, at the Seder, so they said, Abba, what do we have to open the door for Elijah? He's flying all over the world. He's drinking all this wine. Let him come through the cracks. That's a pretty good question for a kid to ask. The answer is, I think, that Elijah announces he's the harbinger for the coming of redemption. And if we want the Messiah to come, if we want redemption to come, we have to get off our hands and open the door. We have to do our share. We have to, that's a first step, to recognize it's not going to all come from God. And secondly, to feel it deeply. And thirdly, to translate that feeling into action. And fourthly, in the famous words of Pirkei Avot, to recognize, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It's not up to me to finish the work. We're not going to be able to finish the work. A lot's going to have to be left to the next generation. But because we won't finish the work doesn't mean that we can't start. We have to do our share. And everyone has the capacity to do their little bit. That's why the Talmud in Shabbat, they have, in the 20s there, they have a whole discussion. When we get up to heaven, what kind of questions are we going to be asked? What kind of questions? And they're deep questions. And as I look at all of you, I'm seeing people who've really made a difference. Everybody makes a difference in their, Ellen, I'm looking at you, Ellen. When you take in someone for, I've often thought that it's easier to care, easier to be at a rally of thousands for Soviet Jewry than it is to take care of one Soviet Jewry. Take care of one Soviet Jew is much harder than screaming for all Jews. The way you cared, that for me, I want to get that point across. That for me is redemption. That for me is a step forward. We all do it in our own little way. Some by writing up-ed pieces, letters to the editor pieces, some by an act of kindness. People may make slight of that, but to me it's, Sue, did you want to say something, my Sue?
Yes, I would love to say something that there were very quiet foot soldiers. I remember in the late 80s, we helped settle a couple of families in Rockland County. Murray and I were involved in getting family Medicaid, health care, dental care, getting a child into school. This was something that was done very quietly. We weren't real loud activists, but we were quiet, I would say, foot soldiers. And I recently found a certificate thanking us for what we had done.
Right.
And
So I love that. And, I take that, I hear that. The real heroes are the humble heroes. And absolutely. Thank you, Sue.
Rabbi?
Tova? Yes, please.
So we have Lance and Tova and Arnie.
Okay.
Okay,
My Lance.
number one, as a web designer, I know that most people see web pages and a page of Talmud as flat. But the truth of the matter is both are layered. Both have depth, as you suggested, with the word melech in the Megillah. And Maurice Merleau-Ponty, the French philosopher, says that depth is a manifestation of God. Number two, my recollection is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Rav Avi, but you believe that the Haggadah is a key to perpetuating Judaism. Is that correct?
It's an important text, yes, even though it's a potpourri that's hard to make sense of, yes. It's a
And
good text.
finally, the story of the bird and the rabbi seems to me to be a recursive miniature of the story of Solomon and the divided child.
Tell me how, Lance. I'd love to hear if you're able to.
Because in the story of the bird, the child is putting the rabbi in what we call double bind. You can and you can, you will and you won't. You'll be damned if you do, you'll be damned if you don't.
Right.
And that's the situation that Solomon finds himself trying to figure out who is the real mother. And in order to determine who the real mother is, he comes up with this trick, if you will, of saying that the child is going to be divided. And of course, the real mother says, no, give it to the other mother because she wants to keep the child. Her most important thing in life is to protect her child.
Right.
And I think that is really a central moment in Judaism.
I've told this story hundreds of times, and I never thought of that, Lance. So as usual, it could very well be that this whole teaching comes from there, but I have to look at that. Thank you so much, Lance.
You're welcome.
Really well done. Is
Tova?
Tova, my Tova. Now talk about activism. This is Tova.
Okay. And this is something that I have to talk to you about because I think that we need to train activists.
Yes, we do.
And I, broached the subject. They won't really take me seriously without you. And so I just want to reiterate again that.
Yes, Tov. I know we have to connect, and I God willing, Bezrat Hashem, Tov.
Because unfortunately, without training, without inspiration, without it doesn't happen. And today we have young people who are aggressive and they whatever. It's not the Soviet Jewry generation. I don't hear you.
Rabbi, you're muted.
Well, I said is we're 80 years after the Shoah, and it's showing. We were never again Jews. Arnie, my Arnie.
I have a few observations I'd like to make. So first of all, when you say, the Jewish people have to do this or they have to do that, now that we're growing up, it's not so easy. Your voice is the voice of a leader. Kadima, follow me. We're going to do it. But think about what the Jewish people are going through at this instant. They're slaves for hundreds of years. They're told they're going to be free. Follow Moses, it's the word of God. They're at the sea. There's no place to go. They have to jump in. They want to go back to Egypt. They're going forward. They see God. They have the holiest moment of peoplehood. He says to them, if I can change, you can change, in that midrash. They finally get to the other side. The first thing they do, they sing. What a glorious thing. They sing, they do where words can't go. The highest moment to me is that moment. And then what do? They complain. It's bitter. They don't like it. So this is people in turmoil. They're trying to get their footing. But a human being, it's not so easy. Human beings are not necessarily holy in the sense, not necessarily holy in the sense that they can change on a dime, which is what they're being asked to do here. Which leads me to another point, and that's, I love that video that you talked about, and I think showed in class at one time, about how there's a person dancing at a music festival, and he looks crazy. And then the most important person, you said, is the second person, comes in and joins him.
Right.
And then a third person comes in, and now they're a group. And pretty soon everybody has the license to come in. Here, there's God, okay, he's a big shot, and there's Moses. But people are relating to Moses. There's not yet a coterie of people joining in to help Moses, to help shape the people. There's a Bezalel here, there's a guy here, I mean, it's not really an organized movement yet. So that also leads to this disparate reaction, good, bad, up, down. So I guess my point is that, it ain't so easy.
No,
It
it's
ain't
not.
so easy to make progress, and it's taken us a very, very long time to get here, and who knows how long it's going to take to get to the end line, if there is such a thing.
Right. No, thank you. It's,
And one last point, when you
please.
mentioned patience,
Of course.
trust, and will before, you left out humor.
Right,
Very
humor.
important.
Yeah, absolutely. Humor. Yep. Thank you, Arnie.
Robert Kalfas's hand is up.
Following up on what Beverly spoke about, people says they want to help, then not sure what to do. And people also feel, well, how much will my contribution help? So they feel, why start? Malka teaches me the slogan in the army is the power of one. The power of one is nachshon, jumping into the water and causing things to happen. Beverly spoke about starting a petition and eliciting other people to help her. And you find there's a lot of people following. And there are movements nowadays. They're not our necessarily, certainly not Jewish Soviet movements, but there are ecology movements and Save the Planet. And the recent article we saw last week found that Exxon knew since the early 1970s that they were destroying the environment. And they continue to do so because their interest was in selling oil. And they suppressed all that scientific information, and it came out. Things got to change because we're killing our planet on killing ourselves. As Beverly said, we'll could be killing our children and ourselves. So you have to commit to being a leader and working with others.
Great, thank you, Bob. And one of my principles of spiritual activism is a spiritual activism who gets involved in a cause even if you're not so sure you're going to win. How many times have I sat at meetings where people say, no, we can't get involved in that because that's something we may not succeed in. But the test is one is involved, even you believe deep down you will succeed, but there's no certitude. That's the real test. You get involved not because it's the popular thing to do, but it's the right thing to do. And Lance, did you quote a sentence? I can't read it completely from the Psalms. Maybe we'll end with this.
Psalm 30, thou
What
hast
is it?
turned my mourning into dancing. Thou
Yes,
hast put off my sackcloth and
Yes.
girded me with joy.
yeah. I love that sentence. Even
We
if
say
one
it every
doesn't
morning,
pray, yeah,
right?
even if one doesn't pray, just to say those words, Hafachta mispidi lemacholi. You've turned my mourning, M-O-U-R-N. You've turned my mourning into dancing. Actually, there's a beautiful song, Lance, that was composed by Debbie Friedman of blessed memory. You turn my mourning into dancing. She's just Debbie's style, just beautifully done. On that note, so I shared with you my first drasha going back 50 years, and I guess it could be given now by somebody who's speaking to me, because I have a long way to go to be true to those words. And just want to bless everybody with a wonderful Shabbat. And I look
Rabbi
forward
Weiss,
to-
I just want to say one more thing.
Yeah,
That is, you're hugging or trying to hug Rabbi Jonathan Sachs,
Yes.
equates you with him.
that was quite a moment. I said, I'm not going to let you go. I used to hug Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, who was the Rav's, Rabbi Soloveitchik's son-in-law, and they're not known as huggers. But I wouldn't let him go. And the last time I saw him, he looked up at me and said, okay, I'll take my medicine. That's what he said. And, but there's something to the hug. I've had people who've come back to the shul and said, I was in the shul for many years. I don't remember a word you said, but I remember the hug. And yeah, love you guys. Just have big hugs to everybody. Shabbat shalom. Take care too. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.